Let's turn our attention now to Elijah. Let's go back and kind of tell the story, because really that's what this is. It's just a great story. And storytelling is such a great asset and a great medium to try to sew things together and see pictures. I've throughout this tried to refer to this as a motion picture, because motion pictures tell stories. And they have antagonists and they have protagonists. Every story has one like that. And then they have incidental characters, incidental scenes, incidental scenery along the way. And we have those. The antagonists begin in chapter 16 and lay out Ahab and Jezebel. And then you have the hero of the whole thing. Elijah comes in out of nowhere. Obviously, he didn't just appear from nowhere. He's been around. But he appears and tells Ahab it's not going to rain until my word. And then he just walks out of the scene. God gets him out of Ahab's sight to protecting, to nurturing, takes him to the river Cherith, and there tries to feed him. But then the brook dries up, and he sends him to Jezebel country, of all places to hide him, to be there with the widow of Zarephath. And here's an incidental character in the whole thing. The widow of Zarephath, and she's hungry, has very little to eat. She's collecting sticks to cook her food. And Elijah shows up and asks for a meal. It would be the last meal she had, and they would die without it. And he tells her, don't worry. Don't worry. You cook the meal. You're never going to run out of flour. You're never going to run out of oil. And then another incidental character occurs here in Zarephath, and that is her son. And the saddest of things happens. The young boy dies. But the most wonderful thing happened. Elijah was able to bring him back alive. That closes chapter 17, and it's such an epic scene, though it's a minor part of the story. Chapter 17 begins, chapter 18 begins with Elijah now showing back up, walking there and telling Obadiah, go tell Ahab I'm right here. He can quit looking for me, I've showed up. And another incidental character is Obadiah. Ahab and Jezebel and Elijah are fixing to be main characters again. And in this narrative here, you have then Ahab, and he calls for the 450 prophets of Baal. And you have the contest, a wonderful epic scene on top of the mountain. It's one of the main scenes, because now you have the main characters. You have Ahab, you have Elijah, and you have all the prophets of Baal, and the people of Israel are all there. Obviously, Jezebel is not there because of what we see in chapter 19. And then you have the end of that story, where they're coming down from the mountain after Elijah spends time in prayer, and the rain comes tumbling down. It comes falling down. And you see Elijah, the last scene in chapter 18 as it closes, running by the chariot of Ahab as they're going down the mountain.
That's right.
And that is such a wonderful scene. It's such a heroic scene.
Yes.
But what we're going to see is the journey from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the valley.
Yeah.
Is a quick journey.
It's not a very long journey.
It's not a very long journey.
That's right.
And so you begin to see something then that we mentioned in the very first lesson. These characters are given to lift us up, but they're given also to reprove us and to leave us without excuse, but to give us hope.
Yeah.
And that's the unique thing about the Bible, Jordan. It tells the good, the bad, and the ugly. God is not partial toward any character.
That's right.
And here Elijah stands both as a model and as a warning to us, because something very human happens here. While Elijah was a man that was able to do miracles, and we're not, he had a nature like ours. And chapter 19, I told someone today, chapter 19 is the fun chapter of this. It may not be fun for Elijah, but it's fun to look at what goes on. And maybe because we can't identify with Mount Carmel.
No.
Okay, we can identify with the widow and with the son being raised. But we can identify with this. Everybody's been on top of the mountain and slid to the valley.
That's right.
But chapter 19 begins as the next epic scene takes place with and.
Yep, that's right.
It continues. And what happens then?
Well, so you made mention of the point. There's one key character that's not mentioned really in chapter 18.
Right.
I mean, she's mentioned in the beginning about what she had been doing.
Right.
And then it's just mentioned that she had certain people at her table, but where's Jezebel?
Right.
Right? In fact, it makes you wonder, had Ahab told Jezebel his plan
Yeah.
or asked her permission,
Right.
would have happened. Probably
Right.
would have happened. So chapter 19 begins, and now this husband has to go tell his wife,
Yeah.
tell the head, honey, here's what happened.
All your prophets,
All your prophets just got
they're gone.
defeated and killed
Yeah.
by
right,
Elijah.
Yeah,
To say that she's not happy,
yeah,
maybe an understatement.
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 So it says, verse 2, chapter 19, verse 2, Jezebel sent a message to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me, and even more if I do not make your life as a life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. In other words, you killed my prophet. Guess what? It's done.
Yeah.
Your life is done. I'm coming after you.
Yeah.
You're a dead man walking.
Right,
The thing is, we just saw Elijah.
yeah,
We saw a man who stood face to face with Ahab, didn't flinch.
right,
One prophet versus 450. No one else is standing up with him.
right,
Didn't flinch.
right.
He's up there, he's courageous,
Yeah.
he's calling down fire, he's running past Ahab. Jezebel sends this message, you're dead, I'm coming after
Right.
you. And something happens.
Something happens.
Something inside of him changes
Yeah.
because verse 3, his response is, it says, he was afraid and arose and ran for his life, came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left a servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die. He said, it's enough now, O Lord, take my life, for I am not better than my fathers.
Right.
And what happened?
You know, something that's a sidebar to that.
Yeah.
I think about him melting before Jezebel there. I think about Peter. You know, Peter was this brash fisherman. He could take a sword and cut off the high priest's servant ear, intending to cut off his head.
That's right.
But he couldn't take the inquisition of a young girl
That's right.
standing by a fire.
Good point.
And he failed.
Yes.
Again, John goes into the place of Herod and says, you have no right to have Herodias as your wife.
That's right.
And Herod can't stand up to Herodias.
That's exactly right.
It's an interesting psychological thing. I can't answer it.
No, that's true.
A man can stand up to a man,
Yeah.
but a man often melts before a woman, and especially a woman who has been scorned and is angry.
Powerful woman.
It's powerful.
That's right.
But back on point, Elijah didn't want to die.
Sure.
He's telling God to take his life.
Yeah.
Because if he wanted to die, he got to stay where he was.
That's right.
And Jezebel would have taken care of it in 24 hours.
That's right.
So obviously he doesn't want to die.
No.
So there's something else happening here
Yes.
with Elijah.
Underneath the surface.
Underneath the surface, there's
And
something
now
else
starts
happening
the
here.
bubble. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, I liked how you said that about chapter 19 is that chapter 18, can't really identify with that Elijah. Chapter 19, we're starting to see the flesh and bones of this man.
Right.
Starting to see what makes him human. So let's flesh it out a little bit.
Yeah.
What happens? What has happened to Elijah for him to get to this point?
Right.
Give us one thing. Why do you think at this point, why is he starting to show this fear, this discouragement?
You know, it's strange to think about, Jordan, but to come off a victory that is so great, to now as great as the victory was, that's as deep as the low is.
Yeah.
The ebbing of emotions, it's kind of like you just pull the plug out of the dam and everything just drains out.
Sure.
And he's totally drained here. But what I see also in these first 4 verses is that Elijah is having a little bit of a pity party.
Yeah.
I just did this and nobody appreciates me.
That's right.
And so he just come off this great victory.
Sure.
And now nobody appreciates me. And so as I look around, and we mentioned this last night in chapter 18, and we said it would become apparent in chapter 19, I am alone. And so if I'm alone, well, you were alone on the mountain.
That's right.
Yeah, but now you're alone now. And off this great victory,
Yeah.
he is mentally and emotionally and perhaps spiritually just exhausted at this point.
Absolutely so.
It's hard to imagine that.
Well, and you make a good point there that sometimes the great victories that we accomplish, they come at a toll, right? They exhaust our mental and physical, even sometimes our spiritual strength.
Right.
Right? You're putting your complete focus in.
Right.
And that takes a lot of energy, but then once you're done, right, there's
Yeah.
a time of rest. Well, he didn't get that time.
No.
He came down off the mountain, and the next moment he
Yeah.
knows he's getting the message saying,
Jezebel's
you're going to
after
die.
him. Yeah.
Well, he just exhausted his mental and physical
Yeah.
strength, and He didn't have all Israel coming out to him and saying, hey,
Yeah.
we're going to watch your back. You're protected.
Right.
In some
Right.
sense, he is alone.
Right. You know, the Lord said the greatest commandment is love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and mind.
Yeah.
Our body, our soul, our mind, we are triune beings. And when they work in harmony together, we're whole.
Yeah.
But when one of those is damaged,
Yes.
when one of those is weak, or when a couple of them are weak,
Yeah.
it leaves us all weak,
Yes.
all the way through. It affects us all the way through.
That's right.
And I think that's what you see here in Elijah is now this great emotional victory, and everything subsides, and he comes, and now there's nobody with him. And Jezebel has just said, you know those guys that Obadiah has been hiding?
Yeah.
And you know those guys that were killed that Obadiah didn't hide?
That's right.
You're going to be like one of them. But then he says something else. He said, I've become like one of my fathers. What do you think that means?
Well, he could be pointing back to what he says. He's not as, the actual phrasing here, let's
Yeah.
get it here, is down in verse 4.
Yeah.
It's enough, O Lord, take my life, for I'm not
I'm
better.
no better than one of my fathers.
I'm no better than one of my fathers.
Yeah, right.
His self-esteem has plummeted,
Yeah,
right? It's of no worth,
right.
right? He sees no worth and no value. I'm no better than any man before me.
Yeah,
Moses has felt that. There are times when Moses, in leading his people, asked God to take his life.
right,
Job, certainly Job and everything he experienced,
right.
begged of the Lord
Right.
to take his life. Seems like Elijah has lost his self-worth before the Lord. I can't even compare to those who came before me. What's your
Right.
observation on that?
When I thought about that, this doesn't make it so.
Yeah.
But what I thought about when he said, I'm no better than my fathers, I was thinking about the wilderness fathers.
Oh, sure.
That may not be them, but I was thinking about the wilderness fathers.
Yeah.
And how that they failed. Here they come to the river's edge, and they come back, and they have this report.
Yeah.
God was going to be with them. God had given them the land. And now, in a moment of doubt,
Yeah.
they're turned back, and God says it's unbelief. And I hear Elijah in this moment say, I'm no better than my fathers. I was thinking about those fathers. It could have been a myriad of fathers,
Sure.
but he's relating something to the past in his history that we would know something about. And those fathers coming up to the river's edge and going back kind of remind me of what's happened to Elijah now.
Well, he at this point, he's in the wilderness.
He's there.
So perhaps in this
Yeah.
setting, in this time, he's thinking,
Right,
I'm no better than they were.
right,
You know, my faith, I'm just like those. I'm just like those who struggled, who turned their backs into wilderness too. Here I am
Right.
in my own wilderness. I'm no better than the Lord. Take my life.
So it seems like then he has he's lost his focus.
Yes.
His focus is on the wrong thing. He's not thinking clearly now.
No.
The threat here doesn't come from God.
No.
It comes from an immoral, evil, unbelieving woman.
Of all people.
And now he's taking his eyes off of God, and he's focusing on Jezebel. And when he takes his eyes off of God and focuses on Jezebel, he becomes weak.
That's exactly right.
He becomes weak.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of another character. Remind you of anybody?
Well, a lot, but give me yours.
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, that's
you know,
what I
the
was
waves
thinking
are
of.
going here, and
The
as long
waves
as he
are
keeps his
coming.
eyes on the Lord, fixes. And then he begins to sink, and he said, "Why did you doubt? Why did you fear? Why did you take your eyes off of me?"
That's exactly it.
And I think the point about that is setting our eyes on God and keeping our eyes focused there, as opposed to the circumstances, and letting the circumstances around us begin to dominate us, as opposed to keeping our eyes on God. He's lost his focus.
Yes.
In
Well,
this.
You made a great point yesterday. You had a phrase that our God is a God of circumstances. When we start using words like impossible,
Right.
God redefines impossible.
Right.
He doesn't see that here.
Right.
He can stand alone on Mount Carmel and look at a wet altar
Right.
and already see God's going to have this lit.
Right.
Confidence. I can make fun of your God because
Yeah.
I know in a moment He's going to answer this prayer. This weak, feeble woman,
Yeah.
God holds her heart in His hands.
Right.
God has the kingdom in His hands.
Uh-huh.
He's lost his focus.
Lost his focus.
He's focusing on the wrong thing.
Right.
He's forgotten that God is
Right.
the God of all circumstances. And I think part of that, maybe realigning to a point you made, he came off of a big victory. Sometimes let a man not think of himself so highly lest he fall.
Uh-huh.
Here's Elijah. He saved Israel.
Yeah.
He's left vulnerable.
Right.
Left vulnerable for the season now.
Right.
Perhaps he didn't anticipate that coming off of this, he would be attacked. Perhaps he wasn't anticipating already in his mind, once I come down off the mountain, they're going to come after me.
Right.
He came down off of maybe perhaps a little arrogance, a little
Yeah.
pride.
And, again, this is the part that we see ourselves in so much.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think hurts him here, Jordan, and adds to that vulnerability you talk about is he has not only taken his eyes off of God, he has distanced himself from the source of his strength and the source of his power.
Yeah. Yes, he has.
He's distanced himself from the source of his strength and source of his power. And that not only applies to God, that's going to apply to others as well, as we're going to see at the end of the chapter when God supplies somebody for him.
Absolutely.
Looking ahead. But he has distanced himself from those who would help him.
Yeah.
He left his servant,
Yes.
went by himself, all alone, a day's journey.
Yeah.
You get the picture of that?
Yep, get those words. He left his servant, he went by himself,
right.
went alone a day's journey. So
Yeah.
the scripture's trying to make it
Right.
really clear. He chose to be by himself.
He chose to be alone.
Yes,
The Lord said it's not good that man should be alone.
that's right.
Of course, in that instance, he created a woman.
Yeah,
But here was this companion with him,
yes,
and that companion kept him strong as well.
that's right.
So now he's distanced himself from that companion that could say, no, Elijah, let's don't go there. Hey, but tap the brakes. Don't go. You're going over the top here.
Yeah.
You're going over the hill. You're on the ledge, man. Come back.
Stop, Elijah.
Yeah, right.
You know better than that. But you
Right.
know, at least to relate with that for a minute, the natural inclination when we are hurting is withdraw.
We go to isolation.
That's right. I want to be by myself.
Yeah.
And that's the worst thing we could do.
I call it the back cave syndrome.
Yes.
We get the back cave and close the entrance to the
That's
cave,
right.
and nobody bothering us
I
there.
don't want them to bother me. I want to
Yeah.
wallow in my self-pity.
Right.
But that's the danger, is that when you're by yourself, you start to believe things that are not true.
That's when we need the encouragement, we need the comfort, is when we're down like that.
That's absolutely right.
So we see then he's physically and emotionally drained
Yes,
at this point.
that's right.
This has been a tremendous victory. But now then the fall to the valley of defeat, the valley of humiliation
Yeah.
has taken place. Sometimes successful, great experiences are exhausting.
Yeah,
We're talking about this being our spring meeting. I can think about different gospel meetings, I'm sure you can too, in which you felt like every night you were on and you were on target.
yeah,
And it was the zenith. It was the high. It was such a high. And while you want to get home,
yeah.
when you get home, the adrenaline subsides,
That's exactly right.
and then it's like, phoop, you're drained.
Ask our wives about the first night after a gospel
That's
meeting,
right.
a week-long gospel meeting. Yeah.
I'm not saying this to be puffed up, but I've had the opportunity to speak before some very large audiences,
Yes, you have.
and I tell you that's thrilling.
Yeah.
That's thrilling.
Yes.
But it's equally as thrilling to preach before 30 who really are engaged in listening to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely so.
And so here, he has invested himself. It takes a great deal of physical and emotional investment and strength to invest yourself in others.
Yeah.
And this has happened.
Yeah.
And now he is drained.
Well, and let's not
Of both of
forget the thrill of experiencing Mount Carmel, right? He saw something, that would have been adrenaline. He just ran back,
Yeah.
outran a chariot.
Yeah.
He's probably literally exhausted.
Yeah.
And so, physically, emotionally, obviously spiritually, because he doesn't. His initial response isn't bring it on.
Right.
My God, beat your prophets, bring it on. He's depleted. And I think maybe before we go on to the next point, it's good for us to bring this close to home for folks, because
Right.
I think a lot of people live right there.
Right.
They don't give themselves the chance to slow down and to recuperate, because when you exhaust yourself, when you push yourself to the limit long enough, hard enough,
Right.
eventually you're going to break.
Yeah. I read something in preparation for this that said the devil's the only one that doesn't take any vacations. And look at all the harm he does.
That's exactly right.
And so sometimes we just think, we just got to keep grinding it. We just got to keep working.
That's right.
We just got to keep investing ourselves.
Yes.
And we don't take that moment. Going a sidebar here just a moment.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the Lord provided that day of rest for Israel for a reason.
That's right.
It was to give themselves in worship to God,
Yeah.
but it was also to rest and rejuvenate and recreate themselves
Absolutely. Absolutely. so.
because of the intensity of labor they had taken.
Yeah.
And here, this has been an intense moment. And if we're not careful, we fall into this syndrome too, where we think we just got to keep working, keep driving, keep grinding. And, you know, if some of us are a little bit workaholic oriented,
Right.
then the antidote to all this is keep working, keep grinding.
That's right. That's right.
And then you keep going down and down and down.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, the problem is, and this principle is described, illustrated in Ecclesiastes 10 and verse 10.
Uh-huh.
When you keep swinging an axe and it gets dull,
Uh-huh.
if you keep swinging,
Yeah.
you have to use more and more energy.
Yeah.
You start to get sloppy.
Right.
The work suffers. You suffer.
Right.
Right? But the principle is, if you take the time to sharpen the
Sharpen the
axe,
axe.
everythk improves.
Yeah, sharpen
your
the
work
axe.
improves, you improve.
That's right.
By nature, your relationships improve. Do you think sometimes we guilt ourselves into pounding into it when we talk about the Lord's work, spiritual work?
I think so.
We look at the nature of the work and we say, well, this is for the Lord. Maybe it's for the
Right.
church. Maybe it's a meeting where
Yeah.
VPS, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we don't let ourselves
Yeah.
take the time to just
Yeah.
relax,
Right.
to rest.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, while this lesson isn't about preachers, because that's what you and I do, we can just share this kind of thing. Preachers face burnout.
Yeah.
And they face burnout because we don't have the sense to practice what we preach to others.
No.
We think we are exceptions to what we preach. And so we preach
right.
rest, and we preach take your time. We preach order your priorities. We preach rejuvenate yourself. But somehow that doesn't apply to us.
right.
And one of the biggest reasons that preachers, now I'm speaking in the most broad sense now, but it's
Yeah.
also true of men who preach the gospel
Yeah.
in the most narrow sense,
Sure.
they leave, is because of burnout.
Yeah.
And Elijah's telling us and warning us here, here's a prophet, here's a spokesman for God, and even spokesmen for God need to take that time
Yes.
and rest.
Need to listen to Elijah
Right.
here.
Right,
If you push yourself to the extreme,
right.
if you push yourself to complete exhaustion, it comes with a price.
Comes with a price.
It comes with a price, and that's where we see here is maybe
Yeah.
getting to our next
Go ahead,
section
yeah,
here. It's just
take
that,
the next point there.
Well, so he journeys,
Yeah.
and he goes into the wilderness, and he
Uh-huh.
lies down, and at least at this point, he's ready to give it all up.
Mm-hmm.
He goes from the Lord's amazing on fire servant
Yeah.
to completely abandoning it all.
Right.
And by the Lord's direction, well, let's get to what God does.
Yeah.
Because we'll end up where he ends up, where Elijah ends up. But initially, where we see Elijah is down, depressed, exhausted in the wilderness, ready to throw it all in,
Right.
and then God responds.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of this chapter is we see Elijah and we ask the question, how does that happen?
Right.
How do you have a chapter 18 and a chapter 19 side by side?
Right.
How do you have a mountaintop victory and then the next day the prophet is
Yeah.
hanging it up?
Right.
God comes.
God comes.
God comes, and his response to this prophet, take us maybe through the first one. What's
Look-
one of the things that God does to help him out
Let's
here?
just begin in verse 5.
Yeah.
Then as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." Then he looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. And so here the Lord provides food for him. The Lord is providing rest for him.
Yes.
And while we haven't gotten to that part, it's on my mind here, so I just speak right now. 40 days and 40 nights.
Yep. Yep.
Think if everybody else was 40 days and 40 nights.
Maybe an angel came to help him
Maybe
and,
so.
serve and
Yeah.
care for him.
Maybe so.
Absolutely.
And so here an angel does the same thing to Elijah
Absolutely. That's the thing. Here and then again in the garden.
in the garden.
A depleted, weary
Right. Depleted.
Jesus
Yeah. Right.
carrying this immense
Yeah.
burden.
Yeah.
Here come the angels.
You know, it's hard. I don't know about you, and I don't know about the other folks. It's hard to imagine that this staunch, grizzled old man, Elijah, could be experiencing this.
Yeah.
But he's experiencing this.
Yeah.
Even the toughest and the strongest sometimes become exhausted. And so now then God is providing him rest and providing him food.
Absolutely.
An angel has come to him to provide that.
That's right. And part of part of this is giving him the time he needs to,
Right.
to rest.
Right.
Right?
Right.
He wouldn't give it to himself. God's giving it.
Right.
You know, he's giving him food. He's giving him nourishment. But then part of it also is he's going to send him somewhere.
Yeah.
Can't stay here.
Right.
Can't just
No.
stay in the wilderness.
No, you can't stay in the wilderness.
And then maybe
Yeah.
there's a lesson there.
Where's he
right?
sending?
He sends him somewhere very specific,
Uh-huh.
and it's historically significant.
Yeah.
He sends him to the mountain of God, as some versions call it, or Mount Horeb.
Right.
That's a significant mountain. A lot has happened
Right.
at Mount Horeb.
Right.
Exodus 3, Moses,
Right.
the burning bush, the
Isn't that
commission of
interesting?
God. He sends him to a place
Send him
where,
to Mount Horeb.
where God has met with his
Yes.
people.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
You know, I don't know that I had ever made that connection in this before, as when I was studying this,
Yeah.
as the significance of where God sent him.
Yeah.
That's 130 miles approximately from Beersheba. So you know he traveled 100 miles to the widow.
That's right.
And now he's going to travel 130 miles to Beersheba,
Yeah.
to Mount Horeb, where all these monumental things take place.
Yes.
And this is another one on the list
Yes.
of monumental things that take place on this mountain.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because it's there, God needs to speak to him just like he spoke to his people before.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's a little different, though.
A little different.
That's the thing. So one of God's responses is he gives him rest and he gives him nourishment. He sends him to this
Yeah.
place. And then we're picking up in verse 11 here.
Yeah.
It says, verse 9, he came to the cave. He lodged there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I alone am left. And they seek my life to take it away. So he said, go forth and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord was passing by. A great and strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of a gentle blowing. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah?
The third time.
Third time.
Yeah.
And again, I'll just go ahead and read verse 14,
Yes,
and
go
then
ahead.
we'll make some observations here. He said, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I alone am left, and they seek to take my life to take it away.
Yeah. You know, one thing in that reading
Yeah.
that you just gave,
Yeah,
I didn't catch it until you were just reading through
yeah,
at that time, are the number of times that Elijah said,
yes,
I have done, I have done, I have done.
yep,
Is he taking the credit for what he's done as opposed to saying, no, Lord, you used me to do this.
that's right.
Lord, you used me to do that. He giving the Lord credit. He's saying, look at what I have done, I have done, I have done.
That's right.
You think that
Well-
has any merit?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely so.
Yeah.
And again, of course, how he ends it both times by saying, and I'm the only one
I'm the only
left.
one.
The lone
Take my
prophet,
life,
Lord.
but again, he doesn't want to die.
Yeah.
Because he can go back to Jezebel and take care of
Yes,
that.
I've been zealous.
Yeah.
I've been
I'm-
standing up for you.
I've been
I'm
left
the
alone.
last one.
Right. But notice in the text that you read there, God doesn't, he speaks of all these great things, these harsh things that take place, the whirlwind, the fire, and all that. God doesn't speak to him in that.
No.
God doesn't speak to him harshly.
Yeah. Though he has.
He has.
Not to Elijah. He's spoken to Job in a whirlwind.
Right.
Same place he has spoken to his people in an earthquake and a fire. He's done that before.
Right. Right.
But not here.
But not here. Here he speaks softly to him.
That's right.
Elijah is not a hardened sinner.
No.
He's a man that's down.
That's it.
We would say depressed.
Yes.
And so God doesn't treat him as though he is living in sin.
No. That's right.
God gives this soft voice. And I think there's a lesson, I know for me in that,
Yeah.
and how when we talk to people, maybe for others to consider, is we have to know the circumstances before we try to criticize or before we try to offer any advice.
Yeah.
And not only does a soft answer turn away wrath,
Right.
sometimes a soft answer is healing.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that soft voice is much more effective that strong, powerful voice that Elijah might have demonstrated on top of Mount Carmel.
That's right.
And so God speaks to him softly here. And sometimes what we need is not a kick in the pants. Sometimes what we need is an arm tenderly.
Yes.
And I put that in there.
Right.
An arm tenderly around the shoulders,
Yes.
not tightly around the neck. And what we need sometimes is someone like God is being to Elijah here.
Yes.
And let me say something real quick, Jordan, on this thing of depression before we go, because I don't want to leave somebody with a wrong impression here.
Yeah.
We're talking about his depression that is a byproduct of the circumstances and his loss of focus here.
Yeah.
We're not talking about something that's chemical.
That's right.
We're not talking about something that may be inherent in somebody's DNA
That's right.
that is a challenge to them.
Right.
Those kinds of things like bipolar, etc., like that, or anxiety that is just overwhelming a person that leads to depression, sometimes those need professional help.
That's right. Absolutely.
That's not what I want folks to understand. That's not what we're talking about here.
No.
Sometimes professional help and sometimes medicine
right.
is necessary to help people overcome those dark things in their life.
Right.
Sometimes the dark things in people's life are not like what Elijah is experiencing. Sometimes the dark things are something that's going on inside of them chemically or DNA.
Absolutely right.
And that's very real.
It's real.
And so it's rather easy to say, well, you just need to, and no, they need to get help.
That's
We're
right.
talking about, here is a man
Yeah.
who has worked himself to distraction, exhausted himself,
That's right.
lost God, walked away from his friend, and now is bragging to God about everything that he's done, at least in his pity party. You know, it seemed like Elijah had a pity party and invited everybody, but nobody came but him.
That's right.
And so he's here in his pity party,
Yeah.
and look at me.
Yeah.
Nobody's here. Richard's not here. Jody's not here. George's not here. Well, I guess they don't care about me.
I'm all alone.
I'm all alone.
That's right.
I'm all alone.
To your point in that, realizing the varying degrees and varying instances of depression ought to at least cause us to be very patient and cautious when approaching it. Not every
Right.
case is the same.
Absolutely.
And we can't treat it the same.
Absolutely.
That's just not being fair, and it's not being loving.
Absolutely.
To do so. Yeah, and one of the things I so appreciate about what God does here is that He starts by asking this gentle question 2 times. He doesn't come out with the accusation.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
He comes, what are you doing here?
What are you doing here, man?
What are you doing here?
Yeah.
And then he lets him answer.
Yeah.
He lets Elijah speak it all out.
Yeah.
And he lets him answer 2 times,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes there's wisdom and just speak your heart.
Speak your heart.
There's obviously a lot weighing you down.
Yeah.
Let me
Sometimes
share your
a
burdens.
good conversational purge,
That's right.
you got to dump the garbage.
Yes.
You know, and we all collect that. You know, it's a human thing. We collect that.
Yes.
The weight of everything in our experiences in life, they begin to build on us. And you know, if you look at a jar and imagine a jar, and that jar is our soul, our heart, soul, and mind,
Yeah.
it's going to be filled with something.
Yeah.
And in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, it says, the comfort with which we comforted you, you comfort one another.
Yeah.
The comfort flows through us.
Yes.
And so as long as that jar is full of the comfort, and that word comfort there is really the word encouragement.
Sure.
As long as that jar is full and we keep replenishing that jar, we serve out of the overflow. But when we don't pay attention to that jar like Elijah is here,
Right.
and that jar begins to drain until it's drained dry, then those dark moments in life come.
Yes.
Everything said, the most innocent, everything done, the most innocent, has a dark
Yes.
connotation put over it. Because now something else is filling the jar.
Absolutely.
The jar is not going to remain empty.
Right.
Now what you have filling it is going to be bitterness. Now it's going to be hate. Now it's going to be strife. Now it's going to be jealousy. All those things are going to fill the jar. And then when you begin to serve, it's going to be acidic.
Yeah.
It's going to be venomous. Then when you speak, it's not comforting, it's biting. It's poisonous. And it destroys relationships, but more it destroys you. And so here, Elijah's jar is empty.
Yeah.
And when that jar is empty, the only thing that we see is me,
Yeah.
because nobody else is there. And the reason nobody else is there is because I've either chosen to leave them, or in my venomous biting,
Yeah.
I've run them off. And then I said, nobody loved me.
No one loves me. I'm all
And
alone.
what's hard at that moment,
Yeah.
what's hard at that moment, and this is what Elijah is struggling with, I think, is to be able to look at yourself and say, this is dark, and I'm lost, and I'm losing it.
Yeah.
And then what you need is you need that gentle voice that takes you out to lunch and says, I've been wanting to talk to you about this for a long time,
Yeah.
but I didn't know how.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You've lost love for the Lord.
Yeah.
And when you've lost love for the Lord and you're not filled with all His fullness, Ephesians chapter 3, then that is a desperate, desperate condition.
Well, and
And that's Elijah here.
I like how you said that about when you replace it, right? You're talking
Yeah.
about you're going to be full.
Yeah.
And so when
Be
you
full of
choose,
something.
when you choose to fill full of that negative,
Right.
hurt, depression, you look at Elijah's words here. You know what he doesn't mention? Mount Carmel.
That's
You know what-
right.
You know what he doesn't mention?
I hadn't thought about that.
All the people who
Yeah.
in that moment were victorious.
Yeah.
But think of that though. When you're not filling yourself, and I love the language you
Yeah.
use about that, about filling yourself with the fullness of God,
Right.
full of light, full of faith. Even good situations get so jaded
Right.
at all you see.
Right.
It's just a negative.
That's it.
Because at that moment, God proved Himself to be the true God of Israel.
Yeah.
And at that moment, there were people
Right.
who turned back in faith, but He didn't see it.
Right.
And there are times, your illustration was just so well. It's just that even though those things are real,
Right.
and He knew it,
Uh-huh.
He wasn't going to see it.
And his thinking and his ration is distorted.
Yes.
Everything is distorted. Everything's out of focus. Like we said, he lost his focus. Everything's out of focus.
Yes.
You know, I'm not poking at anything here, Jordan. I'm really not.
Sure.
But I'm reminded of this in the period of time in which it is expected of us to have social distancing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you hear about the number of cases that are going on today that are a byproduct of that social distancing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Elijah has socially distanced, he has spiritually distanced, he has emotionally distanced, he has physically distanced himself, not only from God, but anybody that can help him.
Yes.
But what he doesn't know, and what we don't see when we're there,
Yes.
is we don't see the 7,000.
Let's read that verse here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because that's a gentle voice.
That's it. Yeah.
One thing is that He let Elijah speak, and then we're going to be looking down. We are down in verse 18 here, so he's going to give an answer. We're going to look at more of the answer here in just a second, but at least just verse 18, what we're
Yeah.
referring to here is that God says, I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. Now,
Right,
I will leave means there are present.
right.
There are
Yeah.
and will not be, there are 7,000 who now and will not turn their backs against me, who are going to be faithful to me.
And we know there's been two with him. One's Obadiah and one's the servant he left behind.
That's exactly right. That's
Yeah,
right. And
that's
he should have known from the mountain. But what,
Yeah.
what the gentle voice of God is trying to instill in Elijah, from what I see here,
Yeah,
is optimism.
right.
Let's change your outlook. You say that all of Israel has turned their back on me and they all are going after Baal. Elijah, you know that's not true.
Right.
There's 7,000.
Right.
There's something to that about thinking the worst versus choosing to believe the best.
Right.
You know, we can sit here in the social isolation and think, man, everyone's using this time and they're not reading their Bibles.
Yeah.
They're not growing. They're turning their back on
Yeah.
God. But I'm going to choose to believe I know better
Yeah.
than that. I know these people.
Right.
I know the people of God. I know that out of this we're going to grow stronger than ever. What are you filling yourself with?
Right.
What's filling your heart?
Yeah.
Is it that negativity or that optimism?
You know, sometimes I'll go someplace and somebody will say, you know, we're just not growing like we used to, or we're just not baptizing people like we used to. And I ask the question, how do you know?
Yeah,
How do you know we're not?
that's right.
Who's the we?
Yeah,
How do you know we're not? Because I know I know of churches growing, and I know of people being baptized. In other words, I know of 7,000, figuratively speaking,
Right.
that are still working and are still teaching and are still baptizing, and that means 7,000 more are coming on board.
That's right. That's absolutely
So
right.
Elijah's kind of gotten the thing here, well, nobody's doing it but me, and now here I am,
That's right.
But then what God tells him in verses 15 through 17 on
Yes.
top of that is, listen, buddy, now it's time to get up and go to work.
That's right.
You've been here long enough.
That's right.
Sometime the best remedy to overcoming this kind of thing is to get up, get out of yourself, and go to work.
Yeah.
Eventually, you have to go back to work.
You do.
I don't care what the situation is. I don't care whether it's 1917, 1918, or whether it's 2020 here.
Yeah.
You got to go back to work. And
Absolutely.
he's telling Elijah now in verses 15 through 17.
Yeah.
And so what I want you to do is I want you to go down to Damascus.
Yep.
And there's a couple of things I want you to do.
That's right.
There's a couple of guys there.
A couple kings you got to appoint.
Got to appoint some kings and some helpers. And you got some work to do.
That's right.
So, okay, I've let you have this long enough.
That's right.
Now then, okay, it's time for you to get up and go to work. And he goes down to Damascus and anoints this guy as king.
Well, and then there's something very specific in there. There's the kings, and God's working about the future of perhaps the next phase of the kings He's going to introduce to the nations around. But there's someone specific in here who's just this key component in Elijah's life.
Right,
It's Elisha.
right,
Because that's not just setting him up as a prophet and leaving him. He's saying you need to start getting this person ready to be a prophet, which
Yeah.
means you've got to use your time and your talent. You
Right.
need to mentor this person.
right.
That takes a pouring out of your energy. You're going to invest yourself in him.
And so what happens then in verse 19 as we move forward this lesson and kind of begin to wrap this up and get to
Yeah.
our takeaways
Sure.
is he listens to God
Yes.
and leaves the cave.
That's it.
And God provides Elisha for him.
Absolutely.
And Elisha becomes that comfort to him.
Yeah.
Elijah becomes his legacy.
Yes.
So Elisha appears on the scene,
Yes.
and things kind of turn around for Elijah here.
Absolutely.
And so I think as we begin to transition here, Jordan, to some takeaways,
Yeah.
I would start here at the back.
Okay.
When you're hurting, you need an Elisha.
Yes. Yes.
You need an Elisha that will come and help you share the work.
Yes.
Come and help you do the work.
And in that vein, we say it as preachers, right? We say it all the time that our work is about the people,
Right,
right? But even as all of God's people, as Christians, our work is about people,
right,
right? And so for those who are older, to invest yourself in those who are younger. Or as a congregation, as big as we are, to invest yourself in someone that you don't know.
right,
And to build that relationship. One of the ways you get out of that cave,
right,
right? The cave is all about me and my hurt and my pain.
Right.
And God's saying, you need to focus on someone else.
right.
Take your attention off of yourself and how bad things are, and look at this man.
Yeah,
And look at what I'm going to use him for, and get him ready.
Yeah.
Get your eyes off of yourself and look on him. Get him ready.
yeah.
Prepare him.
Preparing. Yeah,
That's what we need sometimes. Get
Yeah.
our eyes off of ourselves, and let's look and see how we can invest ourselves in someone else.
you know, the NFL draft was just a week or so ago, and they had this virtual draft. And the Green Bay Packers drafted for their number one draft pick, Jordan Love out of Utah. And they still have Rodgers,
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers,
Aaron Rodgers.
as their quarterback. He's still in his prime, actually. And there's been a lot of talk on all the sports shows I listen to as I drive around or watch while I'm working out, that it's not Aaron Rodgers' job to train Jordan Love. It's his job to win ball games. Well, in our work, we're not out winning ball games. We're out 2 Timothy 2, verse 2.
That's right.
We're taking that word and instilling it in others, and instilling it in others, and instilling it in others.
That's exactly right.
And you begin to appreciate as you get a little bit older when Elishas show up in your life, and Elishas reinvigorate you, and Elishas challenge you, and Elishas make you alive. And that's what Elisha is doing to Elijah. He's bringing him back to life.
Yes. Yes.
And that really, really is very, very important.
Absolutely.
And that's one thing I appreciate about you so much in our relationship. You know, there are three things I think that Elijah demonstrates here. First of all, he says, you know, I'm not appreciated.
Yeah.
Ever been there? Ever said that?
More times I care too. Yeah.
I wonder if any of the elders have felt that way sometime.
I only imagine. Yeah.
Or emotionally drained.
Yep.
You know, he's just flat drained.
Yes.
He spent everything he's got. I wonder if some of our doctors feel that right now.
And nurses.
Nurses.
Yep.
Yeah, all the frontline people.
Frontline
I wonder if they
workers
feel that right now.
Absolutely.
And then his last point, I think, there, well, God is indifferent.
Yeah.
God just doesn't care about my circumstances.
That's right.
And you know, when I'm only thinking about me, I don't think anybody cares, including God.
Sure. Absolutely.
You think that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and so I think one major takeaway from this, I think at times we just need to say it as demonstrably and tenderly as we can.
Mm-hmm.
If we think the journey from earth to home is a straight upward line,
Right.
we're fooling ourselves.
Right.
The journey from earth to home is peaks and valleys.
Right.
But if Elijah had cave moments, and if Moses had his cave moments, if Paul, we would say 1 Corinthians,
Right.
if Paul had his moments,
Right.
I'm not a bad Christian.
No.
I'm not a bad person if I feel discouraged.
Right.
I'm not a bad person, or I'm not a wrong Christian if I face doubts.
Right.
The cave moments will come.
Right.
There are going to come times when you just feel beat up and discouraged and weak. That doesn't make you a bad person.
Yeah, I think about John in prison. He sends two disciples to Jesus to say, are you the coming one, or do we look for another?
That's right.
But John's the dude that's been telling people, behold, the Lamb of God takes away the sin of the world,
Absolutely.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And now he's in prison, and he tells his two disciples, go ask him the question. And Jesus says, go tell John.
That's right.
And he gives him empirical evidence.
That's right.
He gives him factual evidence, which is a quote from the prophets, which would identify him as the Messiah.
Yeah.
He tells John's disciples, go tell John this.
Yes.
This is for his disciples, this is for John's disciples, and for John.
Yes.
Why was John there? Why is Elijah here? Because the circumstances have changed.
That's exactly right.
The circumstance, therefore the emotion changed.
Yes.
And when our circumstances change, our emotions change. And our thinking
Yes.
gets all messed up then.
Absolutely.
You know, I think about that, and I think he was not looking at things from God's point of view.
That's right.
And I know we'll never be absolutely to do that. But if we don't keep ourselves looking from God's point of view about life and about problems in life, about victories in life, then we're going to find ourselves where Elijah's at.
Absolutely. Well, so in that thought as well is being able to realize the things that lead us to those caves.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so if I realize from a study like this, or even life experience,
Right.
that if I just push myself to exhaustion's point and I'm not giving myself any rest mentally or
Right.
physically, you're going to end up in a cave.
Right.
If I'm not surrounding myself with godly people and listening to them and talking to them, if I'm pulling back in isolation, I mean, we're in social distancing now,
Right.
but if I'm making that my norm and I'm
Right.
not connecting with God's people, if I'm focusing on the wrong things, you know what? That's going to lead you to these moments.
Right.
You know, look at Elijah. I loved how you began today. It's a warning.
It's a warning.
Don't get this far.
Right.
But if these times come and you feel beat up and low, you're among good company.
You know, we could just take these things ad infinitum and go on, but
Yeah.
let's kind of wrap this up
Sure.
for people.
Yeah.
Elisha asking for a double portion
Yes.
of his spirit, and basically says, you have great works of this man. And so this man, Elisha, is there for Elijah.
Yeah.
And the point is, we need to find the Elishas in our life that will help us overcome the Elijah moments in our life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've been talking about this as a story. And so we began this epic scene in chapter 19 of Jezebel, and you can just see how wicked and evil and immoral she is, giving this declaration, you are dead man walking.
Yeah.
And then we can see the scene shift to where Elijah leaves, and now he's hiding in a cave. And we want to get on the edge of our chair and say, what are you doing there, man? And that's what God is asking him.
Yeah.
But God provides 40 days and 40 nights. Can you imagine that scene developing itself? God provides 40 days and 40 nights. And then we see all those cataclysmic things happen, and God whispers to him. And out occurs Elisha. But there's one more scene
Yep.
in the life of Elijah.
That's right.
Because Elisha says, I want to go with you. He said, no, man, stay. I want to go with you. No, man, stay. I want to go with you. No, stay. And then in 2 Kings chapter 2, we find that Elijah, it happened as they continued on and talked that suddenly, now wait a minute. It happened as they continued on and talked. Elisha and Elijah are talking. It happened as they continued to talk. You and I are talking. Okay, and what happens next?
I got to be looking around.
Suddenly,
now.
here you go in a chariot of fire.
It would be me. It'd be
Appeared
you.
with horses of fire, separated the two of them, and Elijah went up into a whirlwind of heaven. And so here's this last climactic scene.
Yes.
And this chariot of fire whirlwind comes, and they're talking, and Elijah's in the middle of a word, and there goes Elijah. And you stand up and you cheer in the theater
Yes.
because you see how great this man has been.
Oh, how God has used this
Yeah,
man.
how God has used this man.
And for us in this study tonight,
Right.
that a man can exit out of that low moment
Right.
and come out of the cave, and yet he ends his life soaring on high.
Yeah,
The only
Soaring.
one
Yeah.
to be taken
Only
personally
one.
by God,
Right.
by a chariot,
yeah, by chariot.
home.
Home. What an image. What an image. And then the credits roll and it says producer God, director God. And there's no more credits.
And then more credits. That's
No
it.
more credits.
All God's story.
That's it.
Elijah's story is God's story.
Well, folks, we appreciate you being part of this. We really do. Jordan and I have had fun doing this. We have fun wallowing in this and getting it all over us. And we've had fun preparing this and interacting offset as well as on. And we hope that you've been benefited by this. And, you know, don't let this stop your intrigue with Elijah. Don't let this stop at this point. Take what Jordan and I have offered. We just really have touched the surface in this. We couldn't really mind the depths and the time we had, but we tried to do some things. Take it and do some study yourself and find out how fascinating this man really is. Let's end with a word of prayer, okay? Our God, we're so thankful that you have provided this opportunity for us. It's amazing, God, the opportunities you give us when things around us are so chaotic. And how these opportunities that you give us in the midst of chaos, they bring order. They can quiet our troubled spirits. They can calm our inward souls. And they can lift our hearts on high. Because you are the one, God, that is bringing these things to us, and you're the one that's directing this. You're the one that's directing our lives. And you've brought us to this moment. You've brought us to this moment, these days that we've studied about Elijah, and you've given us this man to be a model for us and a warning for us. You've given us these characters to challenge us, but to reprove us and leave us without excuse. But alas, to give us great hope. And we see that in Elijah. We see that we're without excuse like he was. But we see the great hope when we see him taken away into your very presence. And oh, dear God, what a day that will be when your face we can see. We love you. Jody and I, Jordan and Holly, love this church. And dear God, I'm so thankful for Mike and Terry and Rick and James, Joe and Breck, as shepherds of this church, to be able to allow us to have this medium, to be part of this as our partners in doing this. I'm thankful for their wisdom and for their guidance and for the input that they've given us. And for Eric, and for Richard, and for Craig, and for their work. We are so indebted to them and grateful to them. Dear God, alas, we love you so much. We want to be with you. And as your people, we want to be together. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.